Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who's going to be reviewing the new album Drill Music in Zion by Lupe Fiasco. Now, I'm often requested to review Lupe Fiasco's music, people saying things like, "We need that big brain take, Professor Sky," because I am actually a professor of French literature and culture, and because Lupe Fiasco's lyrics and approach is so academic, to the point where he has recently announced that he is going to be teaching hip-hop at MIT. Now, it's funny because when you're a professor or when you're in academics, it's hard because it's very hard to get a job, and you see other people get jobs, and often, I'll go up for a job and I'll see someone who gets it and I'll be like, I'm better than them. I shouldn't get that. I don't think anyone's going to be saying that about Lupe Fiasco teaching hip-hop at MIT. It's also further proof that MIT is better than Harvard. They have Chomsky and Lupe Fiasco. Who do you have, Harvard? Besides me. Every once in a while, I've given about 6 talks at Harvard. So I guess when I'm there, Harvard's good. But, this kind of idea, that we need to study Lupe Fiasco and treat him as this big brain rapping person, and you need to be an academic, and you need to be at that highest level. I don't disagree. And as you can tell by the length of this video, I don't edit my videos, I don't do multiple takes, so I don't know how long this video is even going to be, but I'm sure it's going to be long. Obviously, it requires a lot of thought to really fully go into depth with his music. But the thing that I always get wary of, I get very wary, I'm very, very wary about pigeonholing artists like Lupe Fiasco, or sort of dismissing him as being effete or too intellectual. And I think what it sets out to do, what happens when we have these divisions, is we sort of undermine the purpose of hip-hop, being the voice of the voiceless, particularly in America, being the voice of African-American life, right? So I think whenever we define, and especially when we create hierarchies, between Lil Uzi Vert and Lupe Fiasco, or, like when we create these sort of divisions and these hierarchies, it ends up, I think, undermining the greater purpose of hip-hop. Shallow versus not shallow, technical versus minimal, conscious versus not conscious. If Lupe Fiasco is one of the best conscious rappers, and most certainly he is, it is still also true that every apparently mindless drill rapper out of Chicago grew up in similar, if not identical, material and social conditions, suffering from the same trauma and systematic racism from which Lupe Fiasco suffered. So I really appreciate that Lupe Fiasco does not lean into this, even though he uses lots of big fancy words I'm going to be talking to you about, and even though he's got that job at MIT, he never quite has that position of being above it. I'm haunted by my memory of seeing the conscious hip-hop group Arrested Development at Lollapalooza in 1993, when they gleefully said that there are some black people who are African Americans and there are some black people who are, and then they used the N-word. And the entirely white audience all clapped in agreement. That kind of positioning yourself in opposition to other artists, I think, really does a disservice to the greatness of hip-hop itself. And it also ends up flattening the art a little bit. Like if you're just like a conscious guy, then you're a conscious guy. And if you're just a material guy, you're just a material guy. We can lose focus of the great richness within that division. Within these different divisions. Billy Woods released a great album this year, and he's a conscious rapper, and you certainly need to think a lot to understand his albums. But his albums are light years away from Lupe Fiasco's. They're not at all the same, even if they might be considered to be in the same lane. I think the most successful rap artists, or at least the ones that I think will ultimately have the longest sort of life in our approach to how to understand this art form, and this is coming from an outsider, I realize I said that very authoritatively. This is my opinion. I'm just some schmuck in Western New York. Don't take me too seriously. But I think the best are people who manage to do both, who manage to be socially conscious while also reflecting hip-hop's more materialist side or its more street side, being MIT and the streets at the same time. Obviously, we've seen that with Kendrick Lamar this year, and why it was so great that he included Kodak Black, really trying to show that these divisions are really outsider divisions that are mostly created, supported, and in support of the dominating class, the dominating white supremacist power structure. So I think artists like Kendrick, like Tupac, Kanye, Jay-Z, Nas, I could keep going, artists who manage to do both, like Lupe does, really do deserve extra credit, extra attention. And Lupe, Fiasco, is an amazing example of, it seems like, really doing both maximally all at once. Now, I should tell you, and this is going to annoy a lot of you, this is my first time I've ever listened to a Lupe Fiasco LP. My first LF LP. I reviewed House. I loved House. That was also my introduction to Virgil Abloh. Amazing. Amazing how ignorant I am. If you don't know, I started this channel in 2018. I'm a middle-aged dude. I just didn't pay attention to music for a long period of time. So how many times have I been told, Sky, you have to listen to Drogas Wave? I totally will. I'll eventually get there, but I want to focus on moving forward. Side note, Dinosaur is still one of the best rap songs I've ever heard. So in that time, I've learned a little bit about Lupe Fiasco. I learned that he really started rapping by listening to Nas's best album, It Was Written. I've been telling y'all, it's a better album than Illmatic. I know, Illmatic. It Was Written is such a good album. And what I've really learned from listening to this album is, I'm not sure if Lupe Fiasco is the best rapper with the best flow or the best vocabulary or the most conscious or anything like that, but I do think it does not get deeper than him. By that I mean like his words have meaning and have references that don't just sort of go to other things, like other properties, but like very sort of deep philosophical ideas and underpinnings, which I think make his music have that sense of real depth. At the same time, what I love about this and what I loved about Dinosaur, for that matter, I know the EP is called House, but that Dinosaur song is just so good, is that he's really fun. He's really light. He's very conscious, but he's also just like, he's like nerdier than me. And I have like a Star Wars collecting podcast for 10 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, this guy is really into manga, and he's really into martial arts, and apparently I read somewhere that he won a tournament or something at Street Fighter 2, and he played as the character Ken. Who the hell plays as Ken? Like, Ryu's right there. He's got the same moveset, and Ryu's cool. Who plays as Ken? Anyways, I don't know. I was stuck at the airport yesterday, sent my daughter off to camp, and the Rochester airport has a free arcade, a free retro arcade. And so I went and I played as Ken. I got my butt whooped by Chun-Li. Not Nicki Minaj, the actual Chun-Li. I will say that the beats on this album, basically, I think every track is produced by someone named Soundtrack. They're very good, but it's very clear they're not central, right? Like, what really matters here is vehicles for the lyrics, not so much like every beat is a banger. No song is poorly produced. Definitely repeat listens, focusing. The thing is, the lyrics take so much water, The lyrics draw so much water that there's not that much water left over to listen to this, to the music and really figure out what's being played. It's all really quite good, but none of it is quite like super remarkable. Not none of it, but for the most part, it's not remarkable. But I don't think it's supposed to be remarkable. The title of the album itself, Drill Music in Zion. So first of all, we have drill music, just the title drill music. I'm not going to define drill music for you because the actual style of drill music does not matter to this album. None of this music is in the drill style. None of it sounds like 5-Yo Foreign or what's his name? The guy who got killed. Pop Smoke, right? None of it sounds like that. But drill music as an idea, like drill music as an idea, is that opposite of Lupe Fiasco, is that music that's very simple and repetitive and kind of stupid and not very intelligent and kind of repetitive and the lower form of hip-hop, which I will restate, there is no such thing as a lower form of art. Period. It just does not exist. There just isn't. So, there's certainly no lower form of hip-hop. Pop Smoke is not lower than Lupe Fiasco. They might be doing different things. They might have different messages. You might personally get more out of one than the other. But I think by focusing on the concept of drill music, I think we're very much in this idea of drill music as an idea. But more importantly, drill music is also the current face of hip-hop's death cult. So America itself is kind of a death cult. We're very obsessed with death. You know, we blame all this stuff on Mayans and stuff, but really we're pretty obsessed by death. But definitely hip-hop has different phases of death. Not Faces of Death, not that movie that scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. Phases of death. So, you know, there's the East Coast, West Coast, and now we have drill music, where a lot of the people who are living in the worst parts of our country, and I don't mean worse, I mean like, you know, the most economically deprived, the most overrun by gangs, are making drill music while also uploading pictures of them killing people or just about to be killed. The internet is filled. There's a YouTuber whose name I don't like to mention because I don't think what he's doing is good. I think it's ultimately a bad thing in the universe, but who talks a lot about these kinds of deaths and these kinds of gang-related deaths, to the point where drill music is so synonymous with the death of young African-American men that the mayor of New York tried to ban drill music. Like, you what? You tried to ban a music? I mean, America's going backwards fast. Like, we're going backwards faster than Notorious B.I.G. in that music video. I didn't write that joke. That's improvised, so I could make it better. Please tune up my joke. Leave it in the comments. You know, our country's going backwards, but I don't think we're ever going to ban a style of music. But the point was clear, that, like, it's seen as being the face of the death of young African Americans in our most disadvantaged society. So then we paired up with Zion. Now, Zion is this word that's confused me for as long as I've been alive. It shouldn't. So I first heard the word like in relationship to Rastafari religion and Bob Marley and rap artists who were referring to that. And so Zion was like this form of heaven, but then also it turns out it's from the Bible, and it's basically the promised land. So it has its own term with the Jewish population and community, and that's why they think of Israel as being a form of Zion, this kind of promised land by God. So everything's all mixed up. For the most part, I think when it's used in hip-hop, it's in that Rastafari sense of a sort of heavenly place that is in opposition to the reality that we live in. The reality we live in is Babylon. Now listen, you maybe know that. I wish to God someone sat me down 20 years ago when I started listening, you know, like when I started like paying attention to hip-hop lyrics, 30 years ago, actually, and just said, okay, Babylon means like bad place. Zion means like good place. Babylon is America. Zion is what we would hope America could be. And just say it like that. So already just the stress and the complications of this album pop right up. Drill music in Zion. Is there drill music in heaven? Is drill music not theoretically like the exhaust of our society? Is it not a natural outcome of streets which are flooded with guns, underserved populations, overcrowded populations, systematic racism, right? Is, in a way, the output of Babylon is drill music. So then to say drill music in Zion creates this kind of strange opposition again. So, let's start talking about the album more in specifics. I always do a stamp, an example song. And I want to do two stamps. They're two songs that are next to each other that I think shows Lupe Fiasco's, you know, brilliance as a songwriter. And, you know, if you're, this is the first time watching me, welcome. Please subscribe and smash the like bucket. It's probably not. Statistically, you're probably coming back because I have a lot of people who like my takes on hip-hop. You'll know that I like going deep as I can and trying to find connections and meanings. So hopefully you'll find these comparisons or this analysis interesting. So the first one, Autoboto, I think will show his talent at tying together nerdy things and making them have deeper meaning. And then the next one, All the Precious Things, will sort of show a sort of deeper, more linguistic side. So let's start off with Autoboto featuring Naira, I don't know how to pronounce her name, never heard it said. The best produced song on the album, super catchy, great drums. has this cool like plucked guitar that sounds kind of underwater and far away. Lupe Fiasco creates rhythmic interest leading into the verse where he goes, okay, like that. Like he makes that noise. Reminds me actually of that Drake song from last week, the bed springs. It sounds a little bit like that. And then he leads into the chorus by starting the chorus right before the chorus actually sets in. He starts the line, "I defend myself in court." So he's able to just create so much movement in between these parts of the song. Now there is the idea of the verses where he names some of society's ills. One street separates, hi to the Crips, goodbye to the Bloods. So like an idea that there's like a street sign in between streets where on one side it'll say, hello Crips, and then the other side will say, goodbye Bloods. You know, like when you're leaving a town, you know? like it says goodbye and hello on the same sign. But it was the souls, the lords, and the GDs segregated by street in the Shire where I was. The reality is most American cities, including the one in which I reside, are segregated by race. And most likely where you reside is segregated by race. Look up the redlining history of your city. You know what? Here's a challenge for you. If your city is not segregated, tell me in the comments. Okay? Do some research first, and you'll discover, oopsie, we did a segregation. Okay? It just happens to be the truth. That's one kind of segregation. The other thing is these areas of Chicago and these areas, a lot of cities, are divided up into gangs, and sometimes the divisions between them seem completely random. Just one street or another. If you're born on one street, you're this. You're born on that street, you're that. So that's the kind of social thing, but it's the chorus that I find the most interesting. You'll see behind me here, I showed this on my Kendrick video as well. This is my bootleg Soundwave. He's a Transformer. It actually says Cassette Man. I bought this at a Transformers convention in Toronto. I was there by mistake. I was in that hotel by mistake. So let's talk about this chorus. First of all, I have it stuck in my head at all times. I defend myself in court. This is sport. I get signals from the source. It twists and it contorts. I feel just like a Porsche. I'm Carrera, era. So he's talking about being Carrera. And according to what I read, he often talks about himself as being like the character Jazz from the TV show, I assume from the cartoon The Transformers, the one that I grew up with in the 80s. Jazz is a character. I'll talk about it in a second. Now, first of all, Transformers, Japanese. Most people don't know that. They started off as Japanese, called Diaclone, then they were moved over by Hasbro, and then they became a cartoon, everything else. And there is definitely a huge Japanese culture influence on a lot of this music here. You know, the martial arts and manga and video games. It's sort of all over the place. There must be an article written somewhere about Japanese pop culture in hip hop made by African Americans because it's an amazing thing. And actually, for that matter, French hip hop does the same thing. And it's interesting because what he ends up doing, and I believe this is intentional because this dude teaches at MIT, is he's using non-black culture to illustrate black issues. Let me tell you why. So if Jazz is his alter ego, if this is his whole thing, and this whole song, and what he's talking about, what I read him say about this song, was that, you know, he has this other side to him that's flashy, that's not the super conscious guy who teaches at MIT. It's the guy who grew up in a tough part of Chicago, who knows how to shoot and who knows how to be tough on the streets and can put up with drug dealers and all that, owns diamonds, etc. So it sort of makes sense, like talking about being a Porsche, which is a luxury car. But if we put it in the context of Jazz in particular, unknowingly, or I didn't know this, the history of Jazz, the character from Transformers, is a handy primer on how African Americans are mistreated and manipulated in popular culture, how their culture is taken from them, and how power is denied. I discovered this morning. I just clicked on YouTube. I found a video by someone named Chris McFeely. I think he has an Irish accent. It's called Basics on Jazz. A totally neutral video that doesn't talk about race. I couldn't find any videos that talk about jazz and race, but it's fascinating, okay? So this character Jazz starts off from Japan as a Porsche 935 Carrera, era. My wife points out that in the chorus, the repetition of era sounds like the starting of a car, which makes sense. So the Japanese toy was that. And when he was introduced in America, he was defined as a special operations agent and a saboteur. He was Optimus Prime, the leader of the Autobots, who are the good guys. Also, quick note, the song is called Autoboto, which I think is a play on Roboto, which is how you say robot in Japanese. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. So I think that's why it's Autoboto. So the leader of the Autobots is Optimus Prime, and his right-hand man, number 2 in charge, is Jazz. He is known for loving earth culture, music, and dance. So he's this character who knows a lot about music and dance. So immediately we understand that if he arrives in America, and the show would end up being set mostly in America, that he therefore understands and appreciates American black culture. His name is Jazz, for Christ's sakes, okay? It makes sense, all right? But what's fascinating is that in the pilot, he had a central role. He was like the primary field general. He remained Optimus Prime's right-hand man. Now, if you're like me and you remember watching Transformers, you're like, no, Bumblebee is his right-hand man. Jazz is cool, but he's comic relief. Because once the show actually went to series, and Jazz rolled out as a character, he became comic relief. He became the guy who spoke like a hip guy. By that, he used black terminology, black vernacular. He would dance, like do breakdancing on screens, and have light shows. Like, I was describing this to my wife, and she couldn't actually believe it, because she grew up with Transformers, but dubbed into Serbian. As it says in this video, as the series went on, however, Jazz would never really be shown to have that level of authority again. He was more likely to be shown chilling out and enjoying tunes. He became that stereotype of the loud-talking cool guy with black slang, dancing ability, comic relief. Oh, that is whack. Time to get down. That's one of the quotes. And the thing that blew my mind, and I had no idea of this growing up, he was voiced by Scatman Crothers. Halloran from The Shining. You like ice cream, Doc? That guy. Now, Scatman Crothers, very interesting person, very interesting career, did a lot of voice work, and basically his voice work was always as being a caricature of African Americans speaking on, like, that's how we would constantly act. So what do we see? We see this character who used to have importance, very important importance, but as he gets increasingly racialized as black, his power is rejected. His authority is inverted, and he becomes a side character who then just serves as a way to make the white-coded characters laugh and to help them in their way. Power, authority, control denied, but still given access. He's still allowed to break dance and say things like, if it's not done with style, it's not worth doing. He can still say all those cute things. What's your problem? Shut up and dribble, Jazz. That's essentially what Jazz's character ends up being. And it's a perfect illustration of this kind of totally innocent racism. Not my Transformers, totally innocent racism that I grew up with. So Lupe Fiasco, I assume he's around my age, probably maybe 5-10 years younger, saw this show. And of course, who's he going to relate to? He's going to relate to this character. And so if he has this alter ego of Jazz, of course he does. Because Jazz himself is playing a character that many rap artists have to play themselves. Of being a sort of loud-talking, sassy, cool guy who holds the code to slang, that performs in a way so that he can get money from people who look like me and children who look like me so that they can live. Some of the stuff with Jazz you can't even make up. There was a line of Transformer toys where they were humanized. They were actually human beings. They were called the Pretender Shells. And when they made a Jazz toy, they made him white. The one time he was human, he was white. In later comics, and I can't make this stuff up at all, Like, I'm talking the 2000s. Jazz creates difficulty between the Autobots and the humans because he shoots a police officer. And what happens when he shoots himself, when he shoots a police officer? I would assume he would defend himself in court, because he can twist and he can contort. I don't have a Jazz toy here. It's down at my dad's house. I think he has a box of my old toys. But like, it actually, the way that you transform Jazz is like he twists and he contorts. And of course, in the first Transformers movie, he's murdered. He's twisted and contorted and torn apart by the forces of evil. So yeah, he's a Carrera Rara Rara. It's just a sort of throwaway line that Lupe Fiasco throws out, and he's just a cool Porsche, but not really. The plight and the suffering of African American entertainers, their inability to be treated seriously, their inability to be given any real power or control over the things that they themselves create, is illustrated perfectly by Scatman Crothers and his performance of Jazz. I found a quote from him where apparently he says that the north side of Cybertron is blacker than the inside of a drive shaft. I don't know what to tell you, bud. It's insane. It seems like the more you go in to this character who's cool and flashy and strong and admired, but totally infantilized. He's the bringer of culture who does not benefit from bringing it. Literally prevented from accessing representation and power. He is cartoon cool. And that's Lupe Fiasco's character. That's his alter ego. His more typical rapper persona. So that's the one side. That's the one side of Lupe Fiasco and his depth. The other is with the song Precious Things, which is next on the title track, again featuring Naira. Cool kind of booping arpeggiated sounds. The beat's very secondary here. Starts off with this chorus. Has kind of basic background melodies, kind of a catchy high line that you hear that goes throughout the verse. But really what we see here is Lupe Fiasco playing with language. Turning phrases. The term turning phrases is an old term. It has its origins in France and in America. I did a lot of research for it, but I couldn't come up with any definitive term. I know that Molière talked about it in the Bourgeois Gentilhomme, which I'll be getting to soon enough. Benjamin Franklin is sometimes credited with turning it. But the idea is that when you turn a phrase, it's like you're turning it in a lathe. Like you're actually like taking a sentence and you're actually turning it into something interesting. So I want to talk about this song in which he talks about all the different ways that hands are used and talk about it in the context of metaphor, metonymy, and synecdoche. And if you're still with me and you haven't smashed that like bucket, okay. So in general, rappers use metaphor, okay? He used metaphor in the last song, I Am Carrera, okay? Like Carrera, he is the Porsche car. Most rappers actually don't use metaphor. They use the very connected, very similar tool, which is a simile, which is to say, I am like something. Most rappers will do that. They will use like. Sometimes if they want to save a syllable, they will just use the metaphor and say that they are something. Pusha T comes to mind as a rapper who uses metaphor instead of simile, like I am Jim Purdue at one point, he says. I am Ichabod Crane, he says at one point. But what's interesting, and we even have that, we even have it in this album, where the first track, which I'll talk about soon, she talks about, his sister who narrates it, asks the question, how did lions in Zion become alley cats? Referring to human beings as lions or alley cats is the use of metaphor. So, in general, a guy named Roman Jakobson, very important literary critic and linguist and stuff, talked about how poetry is usually metaphoric, where like things are replaced. And prose, meaning like any kind of like novel or anything that doesn't have rhymes, is metonymical. It's based on something called metonymy. Now, metonymy and metaphor are completely different, even though they're both turns of phrases. Metonymy substitutes the thing named for the thing meant. The thing named for the thing meant. So, as an example, catching a ride. Okay, like the ride itself means that you are going to get into a car and go, and you're going to get into a car and you're going to have that. What makes metonymy interesting is it's a connected thing. The term that you use is connected to the actual thing that you're doing. It's never a complete replacement. So when we say that people in the inner city are lions who become alley cats, there's no actual connection between a human being and a lion. But when we say, I don't know, when we refer to things as being catching a ride, for example, there is actual connection between getting into a car and riding. Further into this, we have the question of synecdoche, which is spelled Synecdoche. You might have called it synecdoche. That's what I called it up until my third year of grad school. So don't feel bad. Synecdoche is a kind of metonymy where a part is replaced by a whole. And that's primarily what he's doing in this song. Now, people spend their life defining the difference between metonymy and synecdoche. I don't think it's that important. They're often interchangeable, like calling a helper someone to give you a hand, right? You're not like, they are actually showing up and giving you a hand, but that hand represents your whole body. Or boots on the ground, okay? Or calling a bad government DC, referring to Hollywood as opposed to the film industry. So what's interesting about this song is that we have this chorus, oh, how they turn, oh, these precious things. And then we have an entire series of metonymy and synecdoche, where all the different ways that hands and arms are used as figures of speech. Now, this happens to fascinate me a lot. This is one of the papers that I actually got published, The Fall of a Brilliant Monster. You can see that there. And it's all about how the character in this book by Corneille uses metonymy. How she uses metonymy and synecdoche to describe, to better control the situation. It's a very interesting thing because she would always be the hand who would control, and she would manipulate these young men to be the arms who actually executed the hands designed. Very interesting. Of course, manipulation comes from the word from hand, man, right? Manos. So, fascinating stuff. So I happen to spend a lot of time thinking about the ways that hands are. And what makes this song so brilliant is he's doing these things, but that sounds a little bit cute to me. A little bit like, oh, cool, different kinds of hands. But what's great is he's talking about the way that they turn, the way that you want the hands to do one thing, but then the people do something else. And what that does is that shows us a deeper meaning. He's not just going through different kinds of hands, but he's talking about the disappointment that comes with these changing metonyms. Never bite the hand that feed, right? Okay. But then those same hands grab the gats and up their sleeves. They gather traps and apparatus for your grave. They catch you lacking, wrap around your hand and squeeze. So the hand that feeds turns into the hand that strangles you to death. Okay? And in all this, we're exclusively dealing with metonymy here. We're dealing with people whose hands represent them, but represent their changing natures. Where they're feeding you, but then they're also killing you. I swear my hands were pure, I gave him manicures. So referring to his hands being pure, meaning he's not doing crime, represented by doing manicures. Became my adversaries, became my saboteurs. I put carrots on them just like rabbit lures, so he's putting on a ring. My middle fingers like F this and what's happened to us. Used to be clapping for us, thumbs up, and then snapping poets. Now they be dapping foes and grabbing moe. They know that I don't drink, at least I don't think. I asked for peace signs, they gave me Leon Spinks. I asked for okay, I got up yours and go aways. Shoe gestures and throat slicers, the motions made, gave me a sign we can talk through a plan, but my hands was like, fam, you can talk to the hand. So each one of these shows that there is a one hand symbol that represents something positive, something good, and then the other that represents the opposite. So you want the thumbs up, but instead you get this. And in all these cases, these are all metonymical acts. This obviously is a metonymical act, because when someone does this, they don't mean they're going to cut your throat. They mean they're going to kill you, which isn't always the same thing. This ends up being a metonym for murder itself. So all of it's here, and it's clever and it's funny because it's all different things. And yeah, I mean, if if you're teaching a class on hip-hop and how to use it, you could do a lot worse than this song. But then he goes deeper. Who put the arms in arms? Okay, so now we're moving on to arms, and the idea even of calling guns arms is itself a metonymical relationship, right? I put the arms in palms, we're hand in hand, all state, pinky speaker, thumb receiver, how we used to call make. All shakes, now it's fingers crossed over small stakes, meaning we're lying about small things, no taller than a crawl space. Give scissors to my paper, we're not on the same page. Talking about rock, paper, scissors, the game, scissors to my page. Constantly he's showing this stress that he's having with these people who are turning on him. Constantly, these precious things turn. These hands turn. The hands that are feeding you in the very beginning become the hands that kill you all the way through. We was back catcher and pitcher, now you don't even wave. Used to throw a shock at Honolulu from the stage, now you just want to throw hands and technicals on my plays. Technicals on my plays to stop me. So we have, I can't even really keep track of all the hand waves that we're having here. It's like you could have done more to try and keep us out of those handcuffs. So now all of a sudden we're moving on to the prison industrial system, how people are put in handcuffs. So we seem to be having a song that in general is talking about difficulty of trying to succeed and get appreciation, primarily, I would assume, in a largely African-American context, where he's looking for thumbs up, but instead he's getting T signs and threats. But what we're seeing is no matter what's happening over here, it's ending up largely in handcuffs. It's like it only matter when the fans was putting their hands up. So the only value that jazz has for the culture, that Carrera era has for the culture, is getting people to put their hands up. You got popular, treated us like the Yakuza. You was Vampire Hunter D. Now you Alucard. I think Alucard is from Castlevania? I'm not that big of a nerd. I don't actually, I'm pretty sure Alucard's not from Vampire Hunter D, but I don't know. See, that's the thing, because we was praying for you, air guitar and playing for you. All these different things hands can do. You can pray for someone, and then you can air guitar. Right? You turned a deaf ear to what we was saying to you. We was here, can't go back from before. The problem is you don't even write the raps anymore. So the value of the hands ultimately is in its ability to write raps and get fans. So just in one song, we have this tension that he has in his community, the way the community is abused, the way that the value of African Americans is often reduced to what they can do for the white power structure. All of these things are all kind of wrapped up in here, all through this brilliant use of metonymy and synecdoche, moving away from metaphor. Even though Jakobson swears that poems should not be based on metonymy, I think he shows that they can be. So there's just two songs. I'm going to go through the rest a lot quicker. Because this video, I'm recording this video with my new camera setting, and it's going to take forever to get this thing uploaded. The album begins with The Lion's Dean, featuring Aisha Jaco, don't know how you pronounce the J there. But this is apparently Lupe Fiasco's sister, and apparently he begins all of his albums like this. I don't know. I've only heard house, and it's okay. Like I don't love it. If this were the first thing I ever heard by him, I'd be turned off, because I find listening to spoken word poetry to be alienating. Like I have to really push myself to listen to it. It is very well written. It's very well done. Funeral processions increases their frequency because we can't break the spell of Geppetto. Going back to the hands. No one knows, and the scrolls of obituaries contain more words than dictionaries that will define how lions and Zions became alley cats. I've already discussed this idea. That's a great example of metaphor, okay? That the lions, meaning the strong, brave people who live on this promised land of America, became alley cats. Ends with drill down, Zion is in you, so it's playing with this idea of drill music, and it's good, but I'm going to buy this album on vinyl. Whenever it's available, I'm going to buy it, thanks to my Patreons. And I'm probably going to cue it up to track 2. I'm probably going to skip this every time. It doesn't mean it's bad, but I don't really want to listen to it. Next song is called Fish. That's spelled Ghoti. It's an old joke about how English is pronounced strangely. So that GH is the F sound in enough. The O sound is the I sound in women. And the TI sound is the sh sound in nation. That makes Goti into fish. Interesting play on language. We're going to come back to phonemes at the end of this album. Simple beat, very strong drums. I love how he has this whole rhyme with ease, very clever and deep, perhaps too deep at times. Fall like Michael Jackson on Anesthesia, mistaking maidens for manatees. That's very funny because that's the reverse. Mermaids. The going theory is that when sailors saw manatees, they thought they were mermaids. So the myth of mermaids start by sea cows, and this is the opposite, mistaking maidens for manatees. Neuralink is now pirating all your fantasies. That's one of Elon Musk's scams. Mistaking the sanitation for sanity. My mistake. I'm mistaking staying for cannot leave. Mistaking the sanitation for sanity. My mistake. I'm mistaking staying for cannot leave. Just so much in there. And then ends with sort of an all is vanity Egyptian museum. They keep the kings in crates, thrones out on loan. They keep their rings in safes. Even if you're an Egyptian king, even if you have everything, even if you have all the money in the whole world, you might just end up in a museum. Coming up next are those two stamps, Autobots and Precious Things. Then leads to the song Kiosk, which is another masterpiece of a song. That's at least 3 masterpieces on this album, maybe more. Guitar and piano, the drums come in later, and it's fascinating because when we're talking about the grad school rap, a kiosk at a mall is such a beautiful, because this is the thing. Modernist poets, especially French modernist poets of the 19th century, were fascinated by the transitory nature of modern life, like the lack of permanence, like how many things we have that are created and normally stores and buildings are created for permanence. But the faster our society moves, the more temporary things are created. Think like the Spirit Halloween store. Just these things that just sort of exist and disappear. So a kiosk at a mall, like a mall is this monumental place, but the kiosks are what grad students refer to as liminal spaces, meaning they're in between like states of existence. Like they're there, but they're also sort of not there, because a kiosk at the mall can change. It can be a place where you fix your phone one day, and the next day it can be like a makeup place. I once almost got into a fist fight with someone who tried to rob someone I was dating because convinced her to buy this makeup, and I went down. I was like, she's not paying for it. Anyways. But these spaces are like who works there? Who works at these kiosks at the mall? There's like no dignity to a kiosk at the mall. Okay? They're all you just walk past them. But the people who work there live there. Like that's their livelihood. That's their corn. That's how they feed their family. So to have a whole song about the people who work at the kiosk in the mall already is just a mind-blowing thing. It's doing something that great poets can do. It draws your attention to something that you're not thinking about. What is in front of Forever 21? What is in front of the Lego store? That space. Much like the little advertisements at the back of a magazine. Like these things that we just go by and don't think about. Here's an entire song. A very catchy song. I'm in the middle of the mall. With multiple voices. One voice is the voice of the fake diamond seller who works at the kiosk, which has a little bit of distortion on it, and one voice, his clean voice. So the diamond seller almost sounds like he's trying to seduce you into buying diamonds, to buy these fake diamonds, about how if you buy fake diamonds, it doesn't matter if you get robbed, about you can look like you just got signed by the Bears, right? Like the Bears meaning the football team, not the Tekken fighters, we're getting there. And it's true. So it's like talking about this person who's living in this liminal space, who's selling this liminal jewelry, because as he states, like, you can't even tell that it's fake. And if you can't tell something's fake, what is the value of the true thing? The same as the fake. Which leads in to Lupe Fiasco's verse, which finally has some drums behind it. Diamonds are only worth what you are willing to pay. That's true of everything. They're only worth what you're willing to pay. A deceptive game you are killing to play. Now, I have diamonds. It's odd feeling this way. This is that important thing. This is what keeps him from being Arrested Development. He's never saying, I don't do this. Y'all are stupid. He's saying, we do this. But when they start to sparkle, all that star-glittering gaze, it sways, takes your minds off today's. Here, he's doing what one of my favorite person in the history of French philosophy ever talks about, Blaise Pascal, his Pensées. People ask me all the time, what are your favorite books? What should I read? Pascal is one of the best people to read. If you can overlook his terrible, terrible anti-Semitism, 17th century France, not forgivable, but still. There's lots of interesting stuff in this book in particular, and I did publish a different article about how Pascal is actually very useful for understanding hip-hop and vice versa. Because Pascal and hip-hop artists are the only ones talking about the fact that the reason that we spend all this money and have all this luxury is to divert ourselves from the truth. Now, for Pascal, that truth was that we're most likely going to burn in hell for all eternity. For a rap artist, it's their own feelings of insecurity, their worthlessness that's been reinforced by society. Maybe it's that they're going to die one day. Maybe it's the mortality or trauma that's going around them. But it doesn't matter, because all rappers use diversion to not to have to think about reality. All human beings on planet Earth use money to buy things, not to think about it. Every man cave in some Tony suburb of Dallas serves the same function as a diamond on the ring of a rap artist. Some way of paying to divert yourself. Again, up until very recently, there was no word in French for fun. Divertissement was the word, which means diversion, diverting you away from your coming death and eternal damnation. This diversion is what the diamond functions as. It's not just showing off wealth. But when they start to sparkle, that star-glittering gaze, it takes your mind off today's. He gets more specific. Where preachers can praise AIDS as God killing the gays, what an effing phrase never ceases to amaze. But when he dies from cancer, that's God's mysterious ways. Jesus saves African sold slaves. So just going so far, doing so much with this. Preachers praise AIDS as God's killing gays, but when they die, it's God's mysterious ways. So diverting from how terrible our society is, but this is why it's so great. He's not just looking at bad priests. He's also implying his own ancestors. Africans sold slaves, which of course is true. You ever see that movie Amistad? It's a very underrated Steven Spielberg movie. It's really quite good. Jaman Hansu? I actually don't know how to say his name. The most famous African actor who used to be a model, then became an actor. He plays this amazing character who helped to free his entire slave. Like there's a boat and a slave boat, and he freed them. Like with the help of John Quincy Adams, they fought against slavery, and it was one of the first major court cases against slavery, all the way back, in the early 1800s, right? It's a great story. It's great. Make us free. That's what he says, It's great. It's an inspiring story. An inspiring story about how slavery was defeated by a future slave trader. That guy went right back to Africa and started trading slaves because he's like, I know how to make money. I was property. Now I can own property. That's the reality of existence, everybody. There's no heroes out there. There's no heroes. There's no heroes. None. Zero. None. We're all hypocrites. Jesus saves African sold slaves. We're all on the hook. It doesn't matter how oppressed we are. We're all on the hook for what we do. Just beautiful. All tied in together with this idea of course I want diamonds. Of course I want to go buy a bootleg Soundwave toy. Because when I buy that bootleg Soundwave toy and I'm thinking about how it says Cassette Man, and I'm remembering how growing up I always wanted Rumble and Ravage, but I only had the stupid Vulture that came with the toy, and my parents wouldn't take me to Toys R Us because it was in Winchester. It was too far away. You know? Like, if I think about that, I don't have to think about the fact that I live in a suburb that's beautiful but was expressly created to be segregated. I don't have to think about that. Miss Mural is the next song. Jazzy electronic keyboard, strong drum line comes in, and this is, I could do an entire long jag on this, but I'm not going to. Hey Lupe, Fiasco, make your albums, can we stick to EPs? Can you do like 2 EPs a year? That way I could do like an hour and a half on each EP, because it's all about the relationship between the patron and the artist. How the artist hates the patron, and how the patron feels as though he owns the artist. It's a beautifully drawn scene of this patron asking these patronizing questions, referring to how well the artist has articulated. Anytime the word articulate is used to talk about an African American, actually anybody black all over the world. This is a tool of racism and oppression, which highlighting the articulateness is a dog whistle for a generalized statement about the lack of articulation of the rest of the African diaspora and people in Africa. Like little things like this. And then he just burns the patron to death. So it's kind of a funny fantasy. I would love to do an entire study. Apparently he has 3 songs that are called murals. So I'm just going to leave that there as an interesting song that does highlight this problem, because we're listening to this and we're imagining it, right? We're thinking, this is a great story about a super patronizing white super rich guy who's just going into this presumably black artist's studio and just treating him like crap and using him up and feeling like he owns him, and then he's getting killed by the artist. That's so awesome. That's about one guy who doesn't exist. So who's it actually about? Who's it actually about? Oh, it's about me. I'm burning. Me. White rap consumer. Creator of and enjoyer of rap music. Not like creating the music, but being implicit in the creation of the conditions that made the music necessary. He's burning you if you're listening to this music. You're the one on the fire, not some mythical patron. Naomi is the next song, super jazzy, kind of a trumpet intro. Talks about my suspicion is the Christians killed all the Celts. That's funny. I'm related to Celts, and I think it's probably true. Then he talks about the North End in Boston. I grew up in Boston. I grew up in a segregated suburb of Boston. Thank God there was a successful busing program where basically that was my only interaction with any non-white people, was because of that busing program. I'm friends with many people on Facebook. I'm happy to see that that whatever that small amount of effort was actually fruitful. But he talks about Boston, he talks about the North End, and then he talks about Malcolm X. He has this whole kind of chorus here, and I'm going to get personal here. Some Professor Sky lore is coming up. But let's first of all, I was in Roxbury on Malcolm X block. If you don't know, Roxbury is considered to be the most dangerous part of Boston. When I say Boston is segregated, if you say the word Roxbury to someone from Boston, they immediately picture the same thing that people picture when they say Compton or South Side of Chicago or whatever it is. They are picturing crime. They're picturing African American crime. Okay? That's what they're picturing. So there's a Malcolm X block in Roxbury. Wasn't always that way, by the way. No. My grandfather grew up in Roxbury. Had a big house. I went there once to look at it. Doesn't look the same. Big, beautiful house in Roxbury. That's where he grew up, because that used to be where all the rich white people lived. And then they left for some reason. The reason, it was racism, by the way. All that segregation I've been talking about. Like the segregation of America, which is like one of the primary themes of this whole album, secretly. Just throwing it in there. I was in Roxbury in the Malcolm X block, talking the talk that got Malcolm X watched, trying to pick up where Malcolm X stopped. He didn't stop. He was murdered. Only gave my players a Malcolm X box. Look in the sky to see a Malcolm X ring. Malcolm X files. It's a Malcolm X thing. We ask ourselves, what does Malcolm X mean? I return to the Force in a Malcolm X wing and scene. So it's goofy, talking about X-Files and X-Wings, the Star Wars spaceships, Malcolm X wing, all these things. But really what's important here is talking about the status of being a socially conscious figure in America. Makes you feel that you have to continue on what Malcolm X did while also trying not to suffer his same fate and asking this question, what does Malcolm X mean? The autobiography of Malcolm X is the #1 book that all Americans must own. I would show you my copy, but I never have a copy because I always just give my copies away because people need to own it. If you live in America, you need to own it and you need to read it, okay? Like, you ask me what book should I read? #1. Autobiography of Malcolm X. Because it talks a lot about a lot of these themes. It tells us the truth about our culture in a way which is hard to hear but is very meaningful. And a lot of it takes place in Boston, where I grew up. And I just, recently my dad told me this story. And he didn't know what it meant. I swear to God. Okay, so first of all, my dad marched with Martin Luther King, and my family used to actively support Stokely Carmichael. I have ancestors who worked for the Underground Railroad. I have other ancestors who were slave owners. So there's no innocent white hands in America. Unless you immigrated here within the last 30 years, there's no innocent white hands in America. So my hands are covered in blood. This whole house is covered in blood. It's like The Shining in here. Scatman Crothers is asking me if I like ice cream. That's how much blood is all over this place. But this story, my father had no idea what he was telling. So my father was describing how racist his stepfather was. Apparently he was a nice guy, but he was a terrible racist. They were driving in Boston together. In Boston, in Beacon Hill, in front of the hotel where the Boston cream donut was invented, the Parker House Hotel. My dad told me, my stepfather was such a racist. I remember one time we were driving and he sees a black guy with red hair. And he just says to me very loud, probably loud enough that the guy can hear, "Look at that red-headed N-word." Okay, now he didn't say N-word. He used the N-word. And I said to my dad, that was Malcolm X. It's like, what do you mean? That was Malcolm X. How many red-haired, light-skinned African Americans were walking around in front of the Parker House in that time period? So there's a chance that my step-grandfather was actively racist to Malcolm X. I tell that story because it's interesting. I also tell that story because what does Malcolm X mean? I'm somebody who spent his entire adult life talking about the greatness of Malcolm X. Well, my ancestors were 100% part of, if not directly a part of, the things that made him feel unwanted and hated and detested by American society. Next song is the title song, Drum Music in Zion. Maybe too much cuteness here. Stay below the Doppler, turn Robotniks into Sonics, position jostlers, monitor hegemonics, robots, make the robots, soldier the electronics. I don't know. I do like the bit in here that's against the death penalty, talking about how the DNA exonerates people after they've been killed. America is a backwards country that should not be celebrated on July 4th. She shouldn't be, and not even for all the reasons that Malcolm X tells you that we shouldn't. Obviously, overturning Roe v. Wade is terrible, but also we have the death penalty. There's no other civilized countries that have the death penalty. It's ridiculous. You don't kill people in the name of justice. That's I'm sorry. We're supposed to be proud of this country? So here, there's this whole thing: DNA exonerates, posthumous, whatever's left. No resurrection, but the reputation's correct. A beautiful story, and it talks about this difficulty, and it's a great political message. Next song is called Seattle, which has this repetition of "I keep my promise to the streets." He's very capable of doing these great, very catchy verses. Female singer who sings these chorus, more low-key things here. Talks a lot about, he has kind of like a fast rap style here. I would give more quotes of it, but I'm not going to because I feel like we need to get to the end of this review. I'm tapping out at an hour here. You can tell me in the comments if you want me to talk even longer. Feed my ego. Or you can tell me, Sky, it's probably okay that you didn't that you didn't go over the part. I love, yeah, these are some great verses. The final track is called On Phonem. Now, apparently, on phonem is like a term that's used in Chicago to talk about deceased people. I think it's also kind of interesting because phonemes are like parts of words. And so changing it to like phonem is like false phonemes, which I think might go together with that like Lion's Dean and some of the playing that he's doing here with language. And this has one of my favorite verses in rap history. Rappers die too much. That's it. That's the verse. Again, I talk about FD Signifier as being, if not the best YouTuber, tied with the best YouTuber in terms of his content. He has a great thing about how many young black men are dying in the rap game. And this entire thing is an amazing song about that fact. And he leaves the whole back half of the verse empty to create a moment of silence for all these people that are dead. And what's fascinating is he goes on here, just about how rappers get shot too much and how he can't support rap music because he doesn't want it to be true. As he says, facts. I wish that they were lying in their raps. How does that transpire to be so damned by God that you want your friends to be goddamn liars? And we're talking about a goddamn priors, shiny metal boxes on goddamn tires. Goddamn tired. I say if I didn't indulge, my pants would be in goddamn fire. So he's talking about, again, still being complicit in this society, in this music that talks about crime and talks about wealth. But he wants it all to be lies. And I'm thinking about the benighted states of America, and I'm thinking about Buffalo, because Buffalo, a couple weeks ago, some African American people were murdered for absolutely no reason by a white supremacist. Our country's basically already forgotten about it. What are you going to do? Terrible. But then I think about the fact that I love Griselda, right? The Griselda Rap Collective, which is an amazing success story, makes great music. I review almost everything they release. And every time I talk about Griselda, I talk about the fact that I don't care if a single word they say is true. I don't. I don't care if Benny the Butcher ever sold a red top or a crack or whatever it is. And there's always people in the comments that they're the realest there is. They actually sell. They actually still deal. I don't care. I don't care if West Side Gun never sold crack. I don't. Ice Cube was like a middle-class dude, okay? It's okay. He was lying. NWA was a big lie. And the world's a better place for it. I love this concept that he wants it to be a lie, because the truth is, the stuff that's being talked about, this death cult in drill music and in other styles of rap that we're celebrating, in particular, when the people who are doing the oppressing are enjoying the music, I want it to be a lie too. I want Benny the Butcher to have actually, had a good time at high school, maybe started college, then realized that that's not for him and give his life into entertainment. Now, I know that's not the case. I know he actually sold crack and he actually did it and all that. Montana Street and Genesee, all that. I know. I don't want it to be true. I want it to be a lie. I want it all to be a lie. I wish all gangster rap were lies, because I don't want those material conditions to be in place. Amazing. An amazing album. And I still haven't done it justice. But actually, my battery's about to die. These are my Patreons. I'm also going to give a special shout out to Flavortown. I don't know what that means, but someone asked me to say that. So I said it. Tell me in the comments what the hell it meant. Better not be something weird. Or it can be. So they give me money, which allows me to buy music, which I'm going to do. I'm going to buy this album because I really like Lupe Fiasco. Please let me know what's your favorite part of this album. Are you still mad at me for never listening to his other music yet? Or is this a really good representation? And should hip-hop be in colleges? I think it should. I created a hip-hop minor at my school. It's not MIT, but it's got me. Okay. Till next time, for Optimus Prime and all the Autobots, there's the camera.